warm welcome to all Red Eyes Creations members. Thank you for being here and thank you for tuning in. We are continuing our fascinating discussion with John Lash, author of Not in His Image. We want to change gear, I guess, a little bit in the subscriber section and talk a little bit more about the idea of what John calls Gnostic theory of alien intrusion and connect this with the archons, of course. The archons is a subject that I've been fascinated by for a long time. And John, maybe we could actually start with a definition of that word itself. There seems to be a lot of different interpretations of it out there. Seems to be some kind of, almost dispute or confusion where the term actually comes from and what it means. What's your take on the term, the archons?
Well, there are two ways to define the term, and you're absolutely right, Henrik. Even before we talk about it, it's very, very important to present as clear a definition of this term as Gnostics understood it as possible, because it's a profoundly important term in the Gnostic teachings, and it leads us into some really profound areas. In the first place, the word archon is a Greek word that was very common back in the days of Jesus Christ, back in 2,000 years ago, and it simply meant governor. Or like the governor of a province was the archon. Mm-hmm. So that's what it meant in Greek in a mundane sense. But there are two ways to understand the word archon if you want to approach it as the Gnostics did. In the first place, an archon is a being that appears in the Gnostic creation myth. The Gnostics took this word archon out of its mundane context and they used it to describe a certain kind of cosmic entity. You see, the Gnostics had a creation myth, and this is the story of the divine Sophia, a goddess who turned into the earth. Now, on Metahistory.org, you'll find a lot about this story, and I've told this story in nine episodes. I also tell it in my book in 9 episodes. In a sense, I reconstructed this myth. Mm. In this myth, which is too long to go into here, there is an episode where the archons appear in the cosmic order. And they are called archons because the word comes from the Greek root arche, which means first or in the beginning. Hmm. And so what the Gnostics meant was that when our solar system was forming, before the Earth itself actually took the form it has today, certain beings appeared in our solar system before the Earth was formed. That's why they're called archons. They came first. And these beings are kind of described as an inorganic species. And they inhabit the solar system, but they do not inhabit the Earth. So that's how the archons are described in the Gnostic mythology. If you go to the myth and read the myth and study the myth, which is absolutely fascinating, and it's a unique myth. The second part of the definition, which I think might be helpful, is this. The archons, who are also scholars translate the word as rulers or authorities.
Yeah.
The archons play a great role in the Nag Hammadi materials. I would say that of the surviving Nag Hammadi materials, the Coptic materials, maybe 20% or better of the texts deal with these entities. And they not only describe them in the cosmic sense, how they emerged at the creation of our solar system before the Earth was formed, as I just described, but they also describe them in another very disturbing way. There are passages in certain Gnostic texts which resemble 100% close encounters with extraterrestrial beings. And I've quoted these on the Metahistory site, and there's a great deal of material about this on the Metahistory site. And so the second part of the definition, this is very important, this is drawn directly from the Coptic texts. Archons are extraterrestrial entities, and they are like psychic intruders. They intrude upon humanity, they intrude upon the human race. But because they can't invade the Earth as such, because they cannot live in the biosphere of the Earth. They live in the solar system. They are inorganic beings. But because they cannot invade the Earth, they tend to invade our minds. They are entities that can reach us, you might say, interdimensionally, or through a psychic and telepathic level. And all this is described quite vividly in the Gnostic materials. And so it's quite remarkable if you make the parallel with gray ETs and Close Encounters. If you want to make that parallel, I think there's a great deal of evidence that is a good parallel, and it's a convincing parallel, and I've written about that a great deal, as you know.
That's absolutely fascinating. I'm so intrigued by that idea. Let's go into that a little bit later. I want to ask you first, though, are there kind of any definition in the text of what the Archons kind of are doing, what their purpose or what their goals are? Why are they just around the planet Earth or everywhere in the universe? Is there any kind of definition of that?
Yes, there is amazingly precise definitions of this, really. And I think that if I would speak of my own work as a scholar and my attempt to make Gnostic writings, accessible to people and to make them understandable, this is one of the most important points that I have worked on. No other scholar, I'm a self-taught scholar. I don't work with a university or anything. I'm responsible to no one but myself.
Sure.
And I'm responsible to my sense of the truth. Okay?
Yep.
Well, no other scholar dares to say anything about this Archon material. You can take a book, the most famous book about Gnosticism is the Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels. It was published, I think, 24 years ago. It's still in print, widely read. The word Archon is not in the index.
Really?
Yeah. Even though it's obvious from reading the text that the Archons were a deep concern for the Gnostics, scholars will not have anything to do with this because it freaks them out. And it also looks very much like parapsychology and UFO ET material. Sure. And of course, as scholars, they wouldn't dare touch that because it would completely ruin their reputation.
That's unfortunately right.
That's unfortunately the case. So now I'm going to answer your question. It is remarkable that we find in the Nag Hammadi text an explicit description not only of the origin of these extraterrestrial Archons, but of their purposes, of the way they operate, of their methods, and of their tactics in regard to the human species. It's remarkable. And there are a couple of points that I would just make, and then we'll explore it more based on your questions. One of the things, the Gnostic materials warn us about these entities. There's a clear warning that these entities endanger the human species because they can lead us astray from our proper course of evolution. They're deviant. They can deviate us, and they do this in two ways. One is through the factor of what is called error, or plane in Greek. Plane, by the way, is the root of the word planet. So error is one of the ways that the Archons mislead us, and that is when we are beings who need to think and plan things in advance. That is the nature of our species. We stand out from other animals because we have planning abilities. We can make models, and then we can follow those models, and we can actually create things from those models.
Right.
Which other species cannot do. And the Gnostics warned that when we make mistakes in that process, if we do not correct those mistakes, the Archons will enter our minds, and they will use those mistakes to steer us away from the Earth and to steer us away from our true path. So they warned about error. They called them messengers of error. The second thing they warned about, very explicitly, is they said that the primary capacity of the Archons is something called Hal. H-A-L.
Really?
H-A-L is a Coptic word. And what it means is simulation. Simulation or artifice. Or you could say virtual reality. An example of Hal is plastic and pearl. suppose I put a white, round object in your hand, and I say to you, that's a pearl. Well, we know that a pearl is made by nature.
Mm.
It's made under the sea in the body of an oyster. Human beings cannot do that. It's done by nature.
Sure.
But suppose I say, this is a pearl in your hand, when actually it's just a ball of plastic that looks like a pearl.
Mm-hmm.
Now suppose that you were incapable of telling the pearl from the plastic.
Mm.
That would be how? That would be simulation. And one of the things that the Gnostics warned about is that there's a tendency in our own mind to become infatuated with our models, our fictions, and our simulations. And the more that we do that, in a sense, the more we allow these archons to take over our minds. It's a very sophisticated analysis, and it's a very, very strong warning.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
So, in regards to the text again, going back, do you think that, or rather, do you know if I mean, how could the Gnostics back then known of their existence? Is there any hint of that? Meaning that was this something they discovered while they were in prayer or some kind of meditation, or was this something they have just been aware of because of their ancestors have been passing down information? Any clues on that?
How could the Gnostics know of the existence of these entities? How could they know how they came into existence in the first place?
Yeah.
How could the Gnostics know about how our solar system was created? How could they know what the techniques and the tactics of the archons are? I pondered those questions very seriously. Now, you will not find in the texts themselves a direct answer to those questions, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't mislead you on that. So, but I have an answer, and I feel confident about it. But I must tell you that my answer is from an inference, okay? I'm just making an inference.
Sure.
This is John Lash's inference, and you can take it or leave it. This is what he thinks. He thinks that the Gnostic schools of the mysteries, which existed up until the Christian time, were actually the inheritors of many thousands of years of spiritual and shamanic practice. The Gnostics were shamans, and they inherited from their ancestors in Europe, in Scandinavia, from the great traditions of the great seers like Odin. Odin would be a typical example of an ancient Gnostic, an ancient shaman. And so Gnosticism is the flower of indigenous European shamanism. And if this is true, then I would infer that Gnostics were parapsychologists, that they could experience alternative realities, that they could explore the astral world, they could explore other worlds, and in the process of their shamanism and their practice of heightened awareness, they detected these entities directly. They encountered these entities. They looked into the history of the solar system, call it what you will, reading the Akashic record, call it whatever you want. We know today that shamans in indigenous cultures in the Amazon and elsewhere have these faculties.
That's
and
right.
Shamans from, say, the ayahuasca shamans of Peru and the Amazon, and shamans in other cultures around the world, in Africa, for instance, report the same information about these entities. So when you ask me how they know, I say to you, they were accomplished shamans who had faculties of higher perception that allowed them to experience these things directly. That is my view.
Very interesting. Do you think that it could be possible that at the same time they had, I mean, there are so many stories of when, for example, many of the South American tribes are entering into this other